Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Well, this is exciting. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here from St. Cloud, and I'm here to say thank you, Elk River. Man, you did a great job flipping your school board. You did what most people say can't be done, and you proved them wrong. And hopefully you've blazed a trail for the other communities in the state and around the country to do the same thing. And I was going to talk about mainly the errors in the textbooks and a theory that'll blow away the Big Bang when it gets out there called the Hydroplate. And then I heard that there's an MMR mandate for Minnesota students. Have you guys heard about that? So you're going to get like 4 talks in one tonight. Just think of them all as commercials, and I'll show you where to get more. So we're going to take a look at current events to start with and take a look at some of the things that are chipping away at our freedom. We need to know what our freedoms are so we know when they're being violated. And we'll look at the errors in the textbooks and the Hydroplate, and we're going to close with Home of the Brave. Are we? Are we going to do what it takes to keep our freedoms, or are we just going to do what's fun and ignore it and let them get chipped away? And a little bit of background, I spent a lot of time at St. Cloud State, and this is their graduation, and I'm parked right next to their sign. Congrats, grads. And my bike says, did hydrogen and helium really turn into people? And it was there all afternoon for like 2 or 3 graduations. They all went through that door. And why did I say that? It's because that's what the Big Bang supposedly made. Hydrogen, helium, and a little bit of lithium. And here we are. So that happened, huh? And I had that parked in front of the science building a couple of weeks before that. And I came out, and there's a little sticky note on it. And the sticky note says, remember, Google is free. It takes 2 seconds to learn and not fall for bike sign propaganda. A question is propaganda. So the next time I went back, I switched my sign that said, forcing a blind chance origin of life is propaganda. And that's what they do. It's you got the universe got here by chance, you got evolution got here by chance, so I just lump them together and call them blind chancers. And that's like thinking this building got put together by chance. That'd be absurd, right? Well, how much more absurd to think our bodies got put together by chance? And yet that's all the kids are allowed to see. And if that's all they see, they just memorize. They don't think. And my goodness, we need thinkers. We just don't need memorizers. And so my mission is to give everybody all the information so you can think and make an informed decision. And then a few years ago, there was this thing that hit St. Cloud. I don't know if it got down here. You heard of this thing called COVID? Anybody hear of that? You heard of COVID? Okay, well, that shut St. Cloud State down, so I went to Lake George. That's our city park in St. Cloud, and I got to know some homeless people. And I asked, hey, Red, do you know anybody with COVID? And he says, no. And we're passing the bottle, we're passing the joint, we're fine. And he said, I think the cure for COVID is alcohol and meth, is what he said. But I went to Lake George 2 Fridays ago, and there's this Muslim event going on. And I couldn't believe it when there was the COVID shot tent. It's like, we're still doing that? It's like people still don't know the adverse events. And so I went up there and I asked them, can I get a vaccine insert? And she gave me a flyer, a printout thing. It's like, no, I want to know what's in it and what the risks are. And then she talked to a nurse, and the nurse had the insert, but she won't give it to me. And so it's kind of windy. She said, you can take pictures of it. So I'm taking pictures of it, and it's just full of words. I've got one back there from 2022. It's intentionally left blank. It's blank, but a vaccine insert. But as I'm taking pictures, I'm saying, did you know that the turbo cancers have increased since the COVID shot came out? And the miscarriages have increased, and strokes have increased. And then I asked her, do you know who paid the biggest criminal fine in U.S. history? Does anybody know? That's the question. If you want people to get to see what's happening, who paid the biggest criminal fine? John? What? Pfizer. There you go. Pfizer, $2.3 billion for fraudulent marketing. And then, but we don't hear about that because they advertise so much. But don't take my word for it. Tucker interviewed Senator Ron Johnson last week on his show, and I highly, highly, highly recommend listening to it, especially the last 45 minutes. And this is what he says.
There is no way anybody would spend a dime on an ad for a product where you got to list out all the horrible side effects. Why do they do it? It's not sell. Again, you don't know what the drug is for.
They're not selling those drugs.
No, they are buying the narrative.
I worked in the media my whole life,
and that is what we saw during COVID. I mean, that's what completely opened up my eyes.
They're paying NBC and Fox News and CNN and CBS and everybody else not to criticize the COVID shots. Clinton allowed pharma to advertise, allowed pharma to buy the media, which they did. I can verify that since I worked there. But we couldn't even have a debate about the most obvious things during COVID because the media wouldn't allow it. And again, I can verify that firsthand since I worked there. And you just couldn't, they did not want in any way to criticize pharma companies, period. So that's where it started. We're not criticizing these people, period. And it's because they pay all the bills.
Eisenhower warned us about this in his farewell address.
Yes.
It doesn't get as much coverage, but public financing of science and research would lead to a scientific and technological elite to drive public policy. I would view that corrupted. So when you pay for science, you get the result you want, whether it's climate change, whether it's vaccines.
Joe Biden did that. Susan Rice did that. I mean, all these people, they just lie right to your face.
Yeah.
And there's no recourse.
And your eyes are opened up to the total corruption of these federal government agencies, and you realize we've just been lied to over and over and over and over again throughout history.
Yeah, so it's fascinating because they were inside the system. One's in media and one's in the government, and this is what they say. And if you want to hear the errors or the lies that were taught in the text, or the lies that were taught to us, go into thehighwire.com. And if you only take one note tonight, make it thehighwire.com and watch it every Thursday. They've been ahead of the game the whole time. I haven't missed a show in 5 years. And then search Peter Marks. And you're going to see, watch Peter Marks Exposed. See what he knew. He knew there were thousands of injuries. He knew that people were dying from the shot, and yet he's still promoting it. And there's a website out there called therealpetermarks.com. You can check that out. And then they also had a press conference in Washington, D.C. there on the left. And the attorney, they asked him, well, what do you want from this press conference? And Dell says, we want transparency. We want all the data. And the lawyer, he says, Aaron Siri, he said, they've been telling us these things are safe forever. If they're so safe, we don't want them to have that liability from being sued. If it's so safe, get rid of that liability. And if it's not safe, don't force people to get it. And they also did this documentary called Follow the Silenced. And you can see this for free. It's award-winning in California, of all places. followthesilenced.com. And again, we need to get all the information out there so people can make informed decisions. And I don't want people to get anxious if they had the shot, because there's how bad is my batch.com? They talked about that 5% of the batches had 80% of the adverse events. So you might have got a placebo. And so just, praise God for that if that's the case. They thought a third of them were placebo. But anyway, back at Lake George, I asked her who paid the biggest criminal fine, and I said it's Pfizer, but we don't know about it because they advertise so much. She said, well, if you're going to talk negative about these vaccines, you can't take any more pictures. And I said, what? I can't have informed consent? And she said, no. And she took her thing and she went away. And so there's very few things that irritate me more than censorship. So I went home and I typed in Pfizer insert, vaccine insert, and I typed it in. I got this FDA insert, this FDA website, and there's warnings and precautions. You go down to 5.2, and it's myocarditis, which is swelling of the heart, and pericarditis, which is swelling of the heart lining. And it said that mRNA COVID-19 vaccines demonstrate increased risks of myocarditis and pericarditis. And I know somebody who was a Marine, he got the shot, and he got myocarditis, and he was in the hospital for 4 days. And that was years ago. And now he's got these phantom pains on his left side. They come and go. And so, yeah, and are they telling that? Are they telling people you might hurt your heart getting this shot? Are they getting informed consent? And then you go down to 5.3, it says fainting may occur. Well, how many accidents happened when somebody fainted after getting one of these shots? And then on 5.5, it says Comirnaty may not protect all vaccine recipients. It's like, what? It's like, you're expecting me to risk getting heart damage for something that might not even work? And it actually causes you to get COVID more. This is from the Cleveland Clinic. They came and they said that a higher number of prior vaccine doses was associated with a higher risk of COVID-19. The more shots you got, the more likely you got COVID. And then also they did that with the flu shot just last year. Breaking. Get the flu shot and you're 27% more likely to get the flu. And so is that hitting the news? That's why I watch the Highwire. The Highwire is not funded by Pfizer, so that's where I go to get my news. And then people are starting to wake up to this. The CDC eliminates COVID-19 vaccine recommendations for children and pregnant women, and yet days later they still kept it on the schedule. So they're in they're not doing what Bobby says. But anyhow, it goes on to say that there is insufficient evidence that healthy individuals under 65 would benefit from an additional shot. Yeah, there's insufficient evidence. And what was the fatality rate? If you got COVID, what do you think your chances were? I mean, there's some people that thought you got a 50% death rate. Yeah, it's less than 1%. Yeah, exactly right. If you're over the age of 70 and under, you got a 99.5% survival rate. And if you're under the age of 20, you got a 99.9997% chance of surviving. So why did they put it on the childhood schedule? That's what woke up Peter McCullough. And I got his book back there, Peter McCullough. He's the world's most published heart doctor. And then he saw that he put COVID on the childhood schedule. Why? Then he thought, what else did you put on there without justification? And this is his conclusion.
I say, number one, I've called in the U.S. Senate, now the European Parliament, pull all COVID-19 vaccines off the market before anyone else is harmed. Number two, U.S., EU, and all westernized nations pull out of the WHO. They're not trustable. And number three, I'm following the World Council for Health. I am recommending a halt on all childhood vaccines, the entire vaccine schedule, until this is clarified, since messenger RNA is now on the schedule without any concerns for safety by the ACIP panel.
So he said, stop them all. Stop them all until you get proper safety studies. And what would a proper safety study be? Maybe a double-blind placebo, the gold standard, right? And so that's what they're going to do. On the new COVID shots, RFK Jr. will order placebo testing for new vaccines. Alarming health experts. Why are they alarmed for doing placebo studies? And it goes on to say a new vaccine will undergo safety testing and placebo-controlled trials prior to licensure, a radical departure from past practices. Well, I thought there was all this evidence that showed that vaccines are safe. Well, this article in the Epoch Times, it says that except for the COVID vaccine, none of the vaccines in the CDC's childhood recommended schedule was tested against an inert placebo. That's right, none of them were. And then, the Pfizer, the COVID vaccine, what did they do? 2 or 3 months into the thing, they gave them all the shot anyway. So it just got rid of the placebo. It got rid of the control group. And it said many vaccines licensed in the United States were tested against other vaccines rather than against placebos. Yeah, so they're just saying all this mountain of evidence, and the high wire is saying, okay, show it to us. Show it to us. And there's a book in the back, ICANN versus HHS, the great vaccine debate. And it's a letter asking for all this information to HHS, a letter getting back saying, hey, we don't have it, and then another response that they pretty much ignored. And yeah, and then also they talked about removing it from pregnant women. And you can go into Naomi Wolf. She was interviewed on the High Wire. She was interviewed a year or two before that on Stu Peters, and she got the Pfizer papers. These are the papers that ICANN sued to get. You said, hey, FDA, you approved the Pfizer vaccine in 108 days. We'd like to see the documents you used. We'll give you 108 days. The FDA went to court and asked for 55 years. Then they upped it to 75 years. And nothing says trust the science like wait until you're dead and we'll get you what you need to know. So this is the Pfizer papers, and thank God we're getting the information, and hopefully we get more of it. And what the ICANN's been clamoring the CDC and the FDA to do is, hey, compare the vaxxed people with the unvaxxed people and see which ones are healthier. Do a retroactive study to see what's happening. And before Bobby got in there, they got rid of all that data. So they don't want that study to be done. But people are waking up, especially in Iowa. Iowa lawmakers vote to require schools, child care centers to share vaccine exemption info. Because the schools were saying, hey, no shot, no school, which was a lie. So now they have to tell them, here's the shots we want you to take, but here's some exemptions. And in Iowa, you've got the religious and medical exemptions. And in Minnesota, we got the medical, philosophical, and religious exemptions. But there is a bill, HF 3239, that's trying to get rid of that exemption, prohibiting the use of exemption to immunization to conscientiously held beliefs for immunization against measles, mumps, and rubella. That's the MMR that they want every student in the state to get, and that would include elementary and public schools, private schools, home schools. And I talked to a friend of mine who homeschools. He says, we'll consider leaving the state. We aren't putting anything in there. And so what we need is information to fight this battle. And nothing's more powerful than information from a vaccine expert testifying under oath. And this isn't, you can go into the High Wire and type in Catherine Edwards, and you're going to see this 8-hour deposition. It's like mental chess. It's just brilliant. It's like, who is this lawyer? And start at 3:45 of that 8-hour deposition, 3:45, and he's going to ask her about all these adverse events from vaccines. And I'll let you listen to this.
Can MMR cause encephalitis?
Yes.
Can MMR cause febrile seizures?
Yes.
Can MMR cause thrombocytopenia?
Yes, definitely.
Can MMR cause death?
MMR can cause death in immunocompromised subjects, and that happens.
Yeah, and she's seen that happen. MMR can cause death in immunocompromised people. Do they tell that on your 6-week or your 9-month visit? It can cause death, and then goes on to ask, can it cause brain damage? And she says, no, I don't think so. And then he says, are you aware that the CDC says so? And he showed her the vaccine insert, and it says it can cause brain damage. It's rare, but it can happen. So we should know that. And again, if they're so safe, why can't they be sued? All right, and the Supreme Court has actually determined that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. So we got to clean that mess up. And then as far as the religious exemption, this is Stanley Plotkin. Go into the Highlighter, search Stanley Plotkin. This is a 9-hour deposition from 2018. And it was just fascinating again. There's some of the things that he cornered him into. He just paints him into a corner time and time and time again. And this is, when it's almost over, he should have it realized that he knows, that the lawyer knows the answer before he asks the question. So just listen to this. He asks, how many aborted babies have you used? And it starts out as 2, and then see how it ends up.
Your work related to vaccines, how many fetuses have been part of that work?
My own personal work, 2.
Are you listed as an author on this article?
Yes.
This study involved 74 fetuses, correct?
I don't remember exactly how many. 76.
76. Mm-hmm. And these fetuses were all 3 months or older when aborted, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And these were all normally developed fetuses, correct?
Yes.
What organs did you harvest from these fetuses?
Well, I didn't personally harvest any, but a whole range of tissues were harvested by co-workers.
Okay. And these pieces were then cut up into little pieces, right?
Yes.
And they were cultured?
Yes.
Okay. Some of the pieces of the fetuses were pituitary gland that were chopped up into pieces to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Included the lung of the fetuses.
Yes.
Okay. Included the skin.
Yes.
Kidney.
Yes.
Spleen.
Yes.
Heart.
Yes.
Okay. And tongue.
I don't recall, but yeah, probably yes.
In your entire career, how many fetuses have you worked with?
Well, I don't remember
Approximately.
the exact number, but quite a few.
Do you have any sense? I mean, this one study had 76. How many other studies did you have that you used aborted fetuses for?
Oh, I don't remember how many.
He started out as 2. He was pretty confident. And now he can't remember how many he used. And again, these are 3 months old. They chop them up. And the ends does not justify the means. If you have I don't think something that's made in the image of God should be chopped up and used as experiments. And so I oppose those vaccines. And you can see I did that vaccine, that one on the bottom there, what every mother needs to know, that's 10 minutes of Catherine Edwards under oath, and that's it. And I put it up on YouTube, and they censored it. And so they don't want you to see. So I made a Rumble channel called Revival of Truth. And this is behind the vaccine curtain. Everybody can have one, or you can watch them on Rumble. There's a Revival of Truth. We did Monday, that was going to be behind the vaccine curtain. Tuesday was the COVID corruption, and Wednesday was what the globalists have in store for us. And so we need to know what they're trying to do so we can oppose it. And then that behind the vaccine curtain, you get the best of their clips. And some of them are just hilarious, so he gets them to say. Okay, and so does the MMR have aborted baby tissues? Well, you go into the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, chop.edu, and it says that the rubella, the R in MMR vaccine, is made by growing the viruses in fetal cells. So there you go. And if we don't want to have that in our kids' bodies, we shouldn't have to have it. And so we need this information. Okay, now we're going to, they're forcing this on the kids. Now another thing that's chopping into our freedoms is the real ID. You know, some people think it's just a fancy driver's license. No, it's a federal driver's license. So the Fed knows what you're up to. And you can watch this. This is Twyla Bravve, and on the Highwire. I get a lot of this information off the Highwire. And she refers to the law. It's like, well, just look at the law. What's it for? And it's for 4 things. It's for federal it's for federal buildings, flying commercial aircraft, and also nuclear plants. And get this, any other purpose that the Secretary of Homeland Security shall determine. So it could be anything. Medical, marriage, buying a gun, who knows? And then she refers to this hearing that was done in 2021, congressional hearing, where they say your driver's license is being transitioned to an electronic format with the capability of being updated in real time. So the federal government will have access on all that, and her website is alignact.com. And she says that this national ID will end state and personal sovereignty. So we're getting more and more of the big government knowing more and more about us. And there was somebody this was during COVID, he said that tyranny is when the government knows everything about you. Liberty is when we know everything about the government. And we know hardly anything about the government, and they know almost everything. And then the other thing, speaking of big governments, this is the global tax advances to fuel global economy tyranny. This is from thenewamerican.com, that Alex Newman, really sharp guy. I think he hits the nail on the head a lot. And he was talking about this global tax, and I didn't find out about it unless I listened to this guy called Hurting Humanity or Nations Conspire. Now it's something else, Ones Who See. But I heard about this, and the UN says they're going to cut shipping emissions, and it's going to be mandatory fuel standards, and its formal adoption is in October of this year. So hopefully we can throw a monkey wrench in that, because if the UN gets the power to tax, now they got the power to control. And we can't let them do that. And then this Boston Herald says the global fee on greenhouse gases, a minimum of $100 for every ton of greenhouse gas emitted by ships above certain thresholds. And it could raise 11 billion, 13 billion. Okay? And that's just the beginning. You think it's just going to end there? They're getting the nose of the camel into the tent, just like our federal income tax. Back in 1913, they started the federal income tax, and only less than 1% of the population paid taxes at the rate of only 1% of net income. So now look at it. Look how big our federal government is. Just think if the UN did that. And this is what they're talking about at the World Economic Forum.
We're developing, through technology, an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
And you can see more of that on Nations Conspire before it gets taken down. He has a lot taken down. It's the plan to enslave all of humanity is here. Hawaii issues a carbon footprint tax for all tourists. Who heard about that? A couple of people, yeah. Hawaii became the first U.S. state to charge green fees on tourists, and it's a climate impact fee. And keep in mind, carbon dioxide is plant food. If we had more carbon dioxide, we'd have more food and we'd have less droughts. The people who are trying to suck it out of our environment, and I heard there's this big plant in Texas trying to suck out 100 million tons a year. I mean, are they trying to kill us? Well, yeah, I guess that would be it, yeah. Consensus, so we have to say, no, there's more of us than there are of you. We're not going to put up with this. But we need people to get involved, get organized like this community action team. And this is what Bobby Kennedy says.
This imposition of totalitarian control, the obliteration of democracy, the rise of the security state, the rise of this kind of corporate fascism, that is all part of what I would call the biosecurity industrial complex. And these are the forces of the apocalyptical forces of ignorance and greed. And they are going to take everything from you, including your children and your health. They are going to make you a slave. If you don't fight back, we are headed for a dark place. But our army is building. Nobody goes from our side to their side. Once you're converted, you don't go back. And so our army is growing every day, and they're getting more powerful on their side. They're putting in place this infrastructure of surveillance, of facial recognition systems, of digitalized currencies, of vaccine passports, 24-hour satellite surveillance, and all of these new ways they have of obliterating dissent. So they're getting stronger, but we're getting stronger too. And ultimately, you just have to do your duty.
Yeah, they're getting stronger. On the way down, Gary was pointing out, there's another 5G tower. They don't want us getting off the grid. And then so they can have a digital currency. And look out for that. And also, now they're starting to have currency that's programmable, like the food stamps. I don't know if they want you, so you can't buy like pop and sugar and stuff like that. They want people to be healthy. So there's things that are falling into place, and we just need to use cash as much as possible, I would guess. Okay, those are the freedoms. Now, how about the health? Has anybody heard that fluoride's bad for you? Anybody heard that? Yeah, well, yeah. The U.S. agency links high fluoride exposure to lower IQs. Who knew that Utah and Florida banned fluoride in the water? And now there's a few other states, so hopefully that gets some traction. And Florida also made history for the first state to criminalize geoengineering and weather modification. Those chemtrails are chemtrails. They're messing with our government, our environment, and the high wire, they did FOIA requests, and yeah, it's actually happening. And this is what it says, that in Florida, you get a third-degree felony, up to 5 years in prison, and a fine of $100,000. And there's 25 states officially moved to banning. They're looking at it, and Minnesota is one of them, thank God. Okay, and also smartphones. They really haven't been safety tested either. And there's a study, the association between smartphone use and breast cancer risk. And then there's also a diminished male reproductive potential in adult rats. And then this one talks about clear evidence of an association with tumors in the hearts of male rats, tumors in the brains, and tumors in the adrenal glands of male rats. So I encourage you not to hold it next to your body. I've got a Faraday case, have it off to the side. I would, especially around your reproductive organs. Don't have it around there. Anyhow. Oh, and then on a totally different rail, Idaho, they got the death penalty for pedophiles. Yeah, under 12 years old, and it's a firing squad. So don't do that in our state. So the kids in Idaho are probably a lot safer than the other states, so there they are. Okay, now we're going to switch. This is what you came for. This is for the errors in our science books. And you aren't going to get the whole talk. You're just going to get a snippet. You can see all of it. I list off like 16 things that are false or misrepresentations or saying it without evidence. You can see that on my YouTube channel. Everybody take one of my cards. It's got a YouTube channel called Solidify Your Faith. And it reminds me of Ronald Reagan's quote, "The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so." Yeah, there's a lot in our textbooks that isn't so. And I went through our textbooks last summer, and I pointed out several errors. It's things that were false according to Nature and PubMed and NASA and the Smithsonian. I pointed them out to the curriculum director, and she emailed back, said, we're basically just teaching the state standards. And so I asked, well, what standard says we're 1.6% different from chimpanzees? And she didn't respond, but the superintendent did. And she said, we're in the process of reviewing your concern and our response with our district's law firm. It's like, what? Yeah. Instead of contacting the publishers so you can get the kids accurate information, they contact their law firm. Well, of course, St. Cloud, we've got, we think you're the shining star. We got only 1 in 4 students can do math or science at the state standard. Only 1 in 3 can read at the state standard. We got failing grades, getting worse. But we got the superintendent of the year, and this is what she did. If you're rewarding failing grades, there's something seriously wrong with our education system. If somebody with failing grades gets the highest award. And so I went to the school board several times and asked them if they would contact the publisher. And you can see these comments there. And on the second one, I said, I came in here thinking everybody wants accurate textbooks. And if there's someone here who doesn't, and I assume it's nobody that way, but if there is somebody who doesn't want accurate textbooks, that's really close to knowingly lying to students. And if there is somebody like that, that should not be tolerated. They should be reprimanded or voted out at the next election. And the next day or two, I got an email from the superintendent saying this issue has been resolved. It's like, resolved? I don't think so. What they've done is they've laid their hand down. We can see that they don't want accurate textbooks. So if anybody wants to be a school board member in St. Cloud, say, I want accurate textbooks, vote for me. And how did they get this 1.6% different from chimpanzees? PubMed says it's 5%, and keep in mind the difference between those two is 100 million base pairs. And Nature says that we got the common chimp and human Y chromosomes are horrendously different from each other. Horrendously different. Is that a scientific term? Horrendously different? Well, this is how, and I kid you not, are they going to manipulate the data to get 1%? Check this out.
If a genetic paragraph, thousands of letters long, appears twice in a human scroll, but only once in its chimp counterpart, should that second human copy count as thousands of changes, or just one? And what about identical paragraphs that appear in both genomes, but in different places, or in reverse order, or broken up into pieces? Rather than monkey around with these difficult questions, the researchers simply excluded all the large mismatched sections, a whopping 1.3 billion letters in all, and performed a letter-by-letter comparison on the remaining 2.4 billion, which turned out to be 98.77% identical. So, yes, we share 99% of our DNA with chimps if we ignore 18% of their genome and 25% of ours. We may not actually be 99% chimp, but we are 100% great ape, and at least a little bananas.
Yeah, and you can see this for yourself. It's on YouTube, Minute Earth. That's a Blind Chance website or channel, and it's, are we really 99% chimp? Well, yeah, if you get rid of the parts that are different, we're 99% the same. And I debated a science teacher in April, and he asked me, I asked him, which genome is bigger, the chimp or humans? And he didn't know. And it's the chimp. It's 3.3 billion base pairs, and a human's 3.1. So there's 200 billion base pairs that are different, which is 6%. So my question is, how can something that's 6% bigger be 1% different? And so I think this is false. And and they talk about the origin of life. And this is the real weakness of the blind chancers. How did life begin? They can't make a cell membrane. How in the world did they get life to begin? Well, this is how they explain it in St. Cloud. There are a number of theories that attempt to explain the origin of life on Earth. The one with perhaps the most scientific support is sometimes called the prebiotic soup theory. And another video says, the chemicals, the raw ingredients that make up life, were constantly sloshing around, bumping into each other, and combining into new chemistry. Over millions of years, that process can lead to living organisms. No, it can't. Hydrolysis breaks apart those molecules faster than they get put together, but don't take my word for it. Here's a NASA scientist. She got asked Bob Enyart's question. She didn't want to answer it, and this is at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and she basically said, yeah, it's a problem, and it's being addressed. Well, yeah, it's a problem, but it's not being addressed. You can see that at NASA admits water is a problem for the origin of life. And this is a PhD in chemistry. In 1 minute, he explains why life can't begin in water. So I took this clip to the school board meeting, and I played him this.
We're taught that chemical evolution started in the oceans, but you say that's the last place you'd expect to look. Why?
Well, okay, to build up a big molecule called a polymer from many little molecules called monomers, for instance, proteins from amino acids and DNA or RNA from the nucleotide building blocks, every step of the way, every combination spits out a water molecule. They call that condensation. But if you already have water molecules dissolving these things, then the water would come back and actually break that bond apart. It's called hydrolysis. So if you try to do this in water, it's the hydrolysis, the breaking apart that would happen and not the forming. In fact, chemists who want to make proteins or DNA or RNA, they exclude water as much as they can. They even have water-absorbing chemicals to draw out the water. So a primordial ocean is the last place I'd expect to find these polymers forming.
Yeah, so I played that at the school board meeting. I get 3 minutes. That's one of them. And I asked, what degree does your curriculum director have? What degree does your science lead have? What degree does your science teachers have? If they don't have a PhD in chemistry and they're teaching kids that life can begin in water, they're wrong. And then I went back again and again. It's like, hey, is there anybody here who can validate that? You got a scientific paper? Again and again. Is there anybody in the whole school district who can validate it with a scientific paper? And I gave them my phone number. And nobody has called me yet in this whole process. Nobody wants to know what I have found. And I emailed the curriculum director back in November. Could you or the publisher please send me a link to a scientific paper that shows how life began in water and validate what we are teaching our students? And she ignored it until last week. I emailed her because they took away my access to the textbooks. And so I'm a taxpayer, so I emailed them last week, hey, can I look at the textbooks again? Can you send me another code? And she said, well, you can come in and look at stuff. And I said, wait a minute, the superintendent said I could look at them twice. I could have the code twice. Can you send it to me again? And then I asked, could you respond to this request for a scientific paper? And it's been ignored. And so that's what education is. So over millions of years, that process can lead to living organisms. That's an imagination. They manipulate the data. They imagine this to be true. And then this one. Scientists haven't been able to come up with a working hypothesis as to why our retinas are set up backwards. And keep in mind, these are just online videos. They're online textbooks. It would be very simple for the publisher to take down false information. So the publisher finally got back to me. And somebody asked, I had a booth at the fair, and somebody from the curriculum director came by. And she was on that. It's like, hey, I put my name on there. Why didn't anybody call me? I'd be on that committee. And we were talking about this, and she said, well, you should submit a request, or you contact the publisher yourself. And I said, yeah, I can do that, but you could contact them too. 2 people contacting them. She says, no, I could get fired. So a teacher is afraid of getting fired for pointing out errors in the textbooks. So these are not educators, they're bureaucrats. They're going to teach whatever the state tells them to teach, even though it's wrong. And this goes on to say there aren't any scientifically proven positives. Well, that's false, according to the Smithsonian. Here's why your eyes seem to be wired backwards. It says the glial cells did indeed create columns of concentrated light. See, the photoreceptors are behind these glial cells. And these glial cells filter out the UV light that could blind us. So there's a reason for that. And then Medical Express says that the glial cells can guide light just like fiber optic cables. That's an incredible design. And this optimization is such that color vision during the day is enhanced while nighttime vision suffers very little. So this statement that says they don't know why, that's false. And then this one talks about an asteroid impact 66 million years ago, and the dinosaur species were killed off by this event. Well, keep in mind, blood cells and blood vessels and nerves and bone cells can't last millions of years. Collagen can't even last 1 million years. And that's why the person who found these blood cells or these blood vessels was so shocked, because they won't change the date of the dinosaurs. It shouldn't happen, is what she says. Well, yeah, it shouldn't happen if they're millions of years old, but if they're only thousands of years old, it's not a big deal. But let's just listen to her.
The laws of chemistry and biology and everything else that we know say that it should be gone. It should be degraded completely.
And when I poked into it, it was spongy. It was flexible and soft tissue.
Flexible tissue from a 68-million-year-old dinosaur?
Blood vessels.
There they are.
Transparent, hollow, pliable, flexible, branching blood vessels that contain small, round, red microstructures floating in the vessels. I said, this is not possible. Do it again. We got another piece of bone. We put it in the solution. We waited 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. Looked again, more blood vessels. We must have repeated that with probably 17 or 18 different fragments of bone.
And that's not in the textbook. That was 20 years ago they found that. There's PhD scientists who don't know about that. So we need to get all this stuff they're sweeping under the rug. We have to bring it into the light, because millions of years just does not work. And then this one, I couldn't believe this. Anybody knows what those are? Haeckel's fake drawings? You look on the right, it's a bird, a bunny, or a person. And you look on the left, they all look pretty much the same. And then the narrator says, animals go through similar stages of development. They're calling people animals. No, we're made in the image of God. We have the Spirit of God in us. We're not animals. And this is Haeckel's fake drawings, and they're real similar, these images. And they're in Sauk Rapids, too, because at the fair, there's some students walk by from Sauk Rapids and said, yeah, we got taught that, too. And those are false. They're real similar to Haeckel's fake drawings back in the 1870s, over 150 years ago. And this is what they actually look like. They don't look anything like what he drew. They don't look anything like each other. And so why is he saying that we all go through our evolutionary ancestry? That's what he was trying to project with those. And my wife wanted to make sure I point out that's one of the reasons why we have abortion. Oh, it's just in the fish stage. It's not a person. No, it is a person from conception. You got a brand new DNA. It's not your body if it's different DNA. And this is from 1997. It says, embryonic fraud lives on, still appear in reference books such as Gray's Anatomy and 2024 science books. It says, although Haeckel confessed to drawing from memory and was convicted of fraud at the University of Jena, the drawings persist. That's the real mystery. Yeah, why are they still in there? Well, let's let Eugenie Scott, she's the president of the National Center for Science Education, we'll let her explain why these false drawings, and what does she call them? They're not reliable, why they're still in there.
And actually, it's been known for 10 or 15 years that Haeckel's embryos are not to be relied upon. The reason why the diagrams are reproduced is because they're easily available. There's no copyright on them. It's an easy way to illustrate a point.
Well, if your point can't be illustrated with something that's reliable and you have to use unreliable sources to illustrate your point, don't teach that point. Just teach what's true. And this is 10 years ago, how fudged embryo illustrations led to drawn-out lies, so it's common knowledge. Why is it in a 2024 textbooks? It's embarrassing but true. Some of the most influential drawings in the history of biology are wrong, exaggerated to fit a thesis. So we've seen them manipulate the data to get 1%. We've seen them ignore stuff of our eyes. And so this is false. And then this one, it talks about Lucy, a skeleton of a female Australopithecus afarensis, that's Lucy, and a direct ancestor of human evolutionary line. And what did they do to Lucy's hip to make it a human hip? They cut it and they twisted it from a chimp hip to a human hip. And they had a kiosk next to the anthropology department of several years ago. And I pointed that out, and they said, no, they didn't. I said, yeah, they did. She said, no, they didn't. I said, I got it on my computer. Do you want to see it? No. Don't confuse me with the facts, but this is what they did.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bone seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
Well, yeah, I hope so. If you cut it apart and put it back together the way you want it, it better look that way. And it reminds me of what, who was it? Senator Johnson talked about Eisenhower's farewell address. If you pay for science, you're going to get the science you're paying for. And Dr. Jerry Bergman validates that too. He says at med schools, you know, the hospital doesn't pay the doctors, they get paid by grants. And if you want your grant renewed, you better get the data they want, or your grant's not renewed. And that's what happened in Rochester. I know somebody who works down there. Okay, now the Earth's oldest rock was discovered in 2008 along Hudson Bay. When was the Earth's oldest rock discovered? 2008. Well, in 2019, NASA came out and said they found the Earth's oldest rock on the moon. So this is false. It can't be 2008. It's founded on the moon. And it goes on to, NASA says the rock crystallized about 12 miles beneath Earth's surface. Well, how do you get something made crystallizing 12 miles deep onto the moon? And that's the segue to the hydroplate theory. You know, this theory answers so many questions. And you'll be able to, I'm just hitting the highlights. You can go and dive in deep on one of the college talks. It's called Answers to Scientific Problems. And we show you a whole bunch. You're just going to get the best of the best. It was developed by Dr. Walt Brown. And this is the 8th edition. 300 pages. The last one on YouTube went for $270, even though it's a $30 book. Yeah, it's because we've got the 9th edition and we can't figure out how to get it in print. And it's a 2019 copyright. So anyhow, this is 600 pages. And it just answers everything just perfectly. So Walt Brown's background, he's some sort of stupid guy? No. He's a West Point grad, Army Ranger, paratrooper, got his PhD from MIT in mechanical engineering. He ran the Benet Military Lab where he's got dozens of PhDs working for him. He also taught at the U.S. Air Force Academy. And if you want to see him explain it, go into I got a playlist just for the hydroplate on my YouTube channel. Make sure you grab a card. And he takes 8 minutes and explains it. And basically, he came across it because he's driving through South Dakota in the 70s. Just think how long we've been neglecting this theory. In the 70s, he's going through South Dakota. He hears on the radio that somebody claims to have found an ark on a mountain. And he thought, what a crackpot. You know, he's an evolutionist. But in South Dakota, there's not much to do but count down to the signs to Wall Drug, right? And so to keep him going dying from boredom, I picture him if they found an ark on a mountain, that would mean the whole world was covered in water. That would mean a whole bunch of plants and animals got buried in mud and turned into fossils. He thought, wait a minute, if fossils are evidence for a flood, where's the evidence for evolution? And he started to ask his PhD colleagues, what evidence is there for evolution? And after 2 years, he didn't have any. And so then he came up with this hydroplate theory, became a creationist, and he saw in the Bible how it says that the earth was founded upon the seas. And he said, okay, if there was water in the seas, what would that look like? Water under the surface of the earth, what would that look like? He thought maybe, just maybe, there was a layer of water underneath the layer of granite. Okay, just think of the earth as a big apple. The skin is 60 miles thick, made of granite. And then there's a layer of water underneath that about a mile thick. And then beneath that is the mantle. And the mantle and the granite are touching at certain places around the globe. Okay, that's the one assumption. Most theories take a look at what we have, the effect, and try and figure out what caused it, and we don't know. This is different. They go from the known, try and figure out from the unknown. He sets up the known. This is the one assumption. Half of the ocean was inside the earth at one time. That's the one assumption. Let the laws of physics go at it, explains everything perfectly. So the moon tugs on the earth with the gravity. We get high tide and low tide. And back then, the earth wasn't broken into plates like it is today. It was just the crust. So the crust would stretch and compress, stretch and compress, stretch and compress, and it generated heat. So like if I had a wire up here, bend it back and forth, it gets hot. Well, the crust was getting hot, and the heat went into the water. The water got hotter and hotter and hotter. It wanted to boil, but it couldn't because there's no room to expand. And then at 705 degrees and 3,200 pounds per square inch, it becomes supercritical water, where it's not really water and it's not really steam, but whatever it is, it dissolves things like crazy. So it's dissolving the granite above and the mantle below, and it's mixing it all together, making limestone and chalk and quartz and salt. And when limestone is formed, it produces carbon dioxide. And there's 60,000 times more limestone than carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that's because it just got recycled inside there. And Walt Brown, he asked Bob Dietz, he's the guy who coined the term seafloor spreading. He said, hey, where'd all this limestone come from? And Bob says, beats the blank out of me. They can't explain it, but this can. And so the crust is getting weaker and weaker and more pressure. And Walt Brown says that water was under 372,000 pounds per square inch. Can you imagine that? And when it goes to the atmosphere at 14.7, it's just going to explode out of there. Like if I had that water bottle, if that was under that much pressure and you crack the lid, it'd probably destroy this whole building. Just boom. Well, that's what happened when the fountains of the Great Deep broke up. In the 600th year of Noah's life, the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the Great Deep broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. And people try to tell me this is poetic. No, that's about as historical as it can be. Okay? And so what happened when the crust cracked, it went in two directions around the earth, and it came together like a seam on a baseball. Okay? And that's how it could rain for 40 days and 40 nights. The water was catching up. And people say, well, Brian, if that happened, wouldn't it leave a mark? And it's like, yeah, it did. The mid-oceanic ridge, that mountain range in the ocean there, that's where the fountains of the Great Deep broke up. That's below it. And so what happened, the water's erupting out there like crazy, the granite's eroding on the bottom and the sides, and the mantle's eroding. That's where we get all the sediment for the sedimentary rock. Okay, now you got two cliffs 60 miles high. And you can't have a cliff 5 miles on high because 5 miles high on Earth because it'll crush it. So all this stuff is crumbling into this water that's getting shot up with tremendous force. The cliffs get wider and wider and wider, and pretty soon there's nothing pushing down where the Atlantic Ocean is. So that mantle bulges. Okay, so the mantle bulges, and it causes the continents to start sliding because they're on water. Like if you lift up a train track, the train's going to start rolling. That's what's happening. North America, South America going to the west, Africa, Europe going to the east, and they keep going until they meet resistance, and then they buckle up and form mountains. That's why the mountain ranges are mainly parallel to the mid-Atlantic ridge. And mountains are a big mass on a small base, so they sink in. Well, if something sinks in, something's got to rise up. That's how you get the plateaus. They have a hard time explaining the force for that, the plateaus. And similarly, that mid-oceanic ridge that's rising up all around the world, that's rising up, something's got to sink in. What sinks in? The Pacific Ocean. That's why the trenches are there. That's why all the volcanic activity, that's the ring of fire. It sucks in. And that's all the volcanoes. The Pacific is so much different than the other oceans. Why is that? Even Zealandia, the 8th continent, sunk in. And we don't have time for that. But they find, skipping ahead a little bit, fast forward, they found mammoths frozen in the Arctic. Okay, and one of them is frozen standing up. How do you freeze something standing up? Who knew they found a mammoth frozen standing up? Yeah, this wasn't in their textbook either. How does that happen? Well, some of that water and mud and stuff that from the fountains of the Great Deep was going up with such tremendous force it got out of our atmosphere, got super cold, and then Earth's gravity got it back, and it came slamming down and buried them in muddy hail. And they found identifiable food in the stomach. Okay, fast forward a little bit more. Some of this stuff was going up with such tremendous force. Not only did it escape our atmosphere, it escaped the Earth's gravitational pull. So now you got these boulders and rocks and mud and dry ice and ice going through the solar system like dirty snowballs. What's been described as a dirty snowball? Comet. There you go. So they say the comets came from Earth. And they've been making accurate predictions. Walt Brown predicted they'd find rounded boulders in comets and asteroids, and that's what they found, Comet 67P. They call them dinosaur eggs. And when things break apart in space, they're going to be jagged. The only way you get a rounded boulder is if it flows through a fast flow of water before it gets shot up there. So this theory says the comets and the asteroids came from Earth, and what they're finding is that's the case. And they also find, it's a major mystery how two objects, each the size of skyscrapers, could collide without blowing each other to smithereens. This is especially puzzling in a region of the solar system where gravitational forces would normally involve collision speeds of 4,500 miles an hour. But if they're all coming from the same space, same place, at the same speed, the same vector, they can come together like a peanut. And so that's how we can explain. That's getting to get a moon, too. And this is Pastor Kevin Lee. He had orbital physics classes 20-some years ago, and I think God was preparing him for a time such as this, because we're going to destroy the Big Bang when this hits the mainstream. And this is what he finds, what he says.
There's a strange moon of the asteroid Dinkinish. When the Lucy probe was here looking at Dinkinish, it saw this. Oh, another asteroid with a moon. And then it went a little bit further and took another angle at it. And it said, oh, it's an asteroid with a moon that is made up of two components that are contact binaries of the same size. Absolutely impossible, except for the hydroplate theory. Principal investigator for Lucy said in a statement, I would have never expected a system that looks like this. In particular, I don't understand why the two components of the satellite have similar sizes. This is going to be fun for the scientific community to figure out. No, it's not going to be fun. They're never going to figure it out unless they embrace the hydroplate theory premise of how they were sent up into space. Contact binary systems seem to be fairly common. Now there's, this is common to find contact binaries, which was impossible to them a few years ago until they keep finding them everywhere. But scientists hadn't seen one orbiting an asteroid prior to Dinkinish, and we never suspected anything so bizarre. Details of how this unusual moon formed remain mysterious, and it will remain mysterious until people embrace Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory. They'll never figure it out. Scientists were shocked in 1993 when for the first time they saw a moon orbiting an asteroid called Dactyl. They said it was impossible, and then they saw it. Galileo scientists correctly stated that it is virtually impossible, that the moon is a captured object, something created completely separately from light. It is impossible to catch a moon in the vacuum of space. Now, decades later, scientists have found that 17%, more than 245 asteroids have orbiting moons. And now a moon with a moon can only be explained by the hydroplate theory.
That's the only way it's going to be, they can explain it. And now this is this is from Real Science Radio. You can see this. I was on the air there. But he showed a clip from Astro Alexandra talking about serpentine, which forms when water meets the mantle. And you notice that the orange there? That's the mid-oceanic ridge I just showed you, where the water came from. And as you're watching this, watch the guy in the bottom right, his expressions.
So let me know what you think.
This is the most insane space news in a really long time. This asteroid, called Bennu, is 63 million kilometers away. That's 160 times farther than the moon is. Over the last few years, this spacecraft called OSIRIS-REx traveled all the way there, touched its surface, grabbed a sample, and brought it all the way back to Earth. And what they found in that sample is insane. It's rich in carbon, nitrogen, and organic compounds, all of which are essential to life as we know it, but we've seen that before. The asteroid is also covered in a mineral called serpentine, which looks like this. And these samples look just like the type of rock that we find here in mid-ocean ridges. This is where the stuff from the mantle of the Earth comes up and touches the water. It's underwater. Scientists think that this asteroid could be a chunk of an ancient small ocean world. This could be a piece of an old watery planet that's been traveling through space for billions of years, and we just took a sample of it.
Wow.
What do you think of that?
Wow. Oh my goodness.
We have a few minor tweaks for, first of all, that watery planet, let's call it Earth,
Oh,
as
yeah.
Kevin Lee likes to say. I wanted to get your reaction, Brian, because when I saw that, I'm like, wow, she works for Walt Brown and Real Science Radio in creating a short for us without us having to do all that production effort.
Yeah, she needs a raise, I think. Man.
Well, what everyone just saw on display was an example of a victim of the government schools, a victim of the deceptions and the errors that Brian has uncovered. That girl, to not even consider that this giant water planet is Earth, but that it's been traveling through space for millions of years, is because she has been victimized by exactly what Brian's been uncovering. And it's actually sad. It's sad to see, but it is instructive as to the work we have to do.
And there's the heartbeat, and eventually the heart stops. And that's why I do this. Where are people going when their heart stops? If you're believing in blind chance and you reject the Creator and His Son, you're going to end up in hell. And I'm using this creation model to say, hey, there is a Creator. And I think that we should consider that at least. And then we go to land of the free. But you could teach the hydroplate theory without mentioning God too. I just like to throw that in there so people can think, are we land of the free? Well, it's going to depend if we're the home of the brave. What are we going to do with this information? And I encourage people to take these half-page flyers here, and you're going to see the blind chance perspective on one side, and questions for them are, where did matter come from? How did life begin? And also the questions to make people wake up are, who paid the biggest criminal fine in U.S. history, and how did Tower 7 fall? How many towers fell on September 11th? Who thinks 1? Who thinks 2? Who thinks 3? There was 3, and they talk about that on the Tucker Carlson thing.
Building 7 was never hit by a plane. Why did it fall down in exactly the same way the first 2 towers did? Why would our government continue to lie about it?
I can't answer the question. All I can say is it raises my suspicion. Wow, is that weird? These buildings being demolished, boom, just, free fall. Well, the only way that happens is if you remove all of their supports at the same time. You blow them all out so that a building can really free fall. If it's collapsing something else, it's like, you build like a fire and it collapses off to the side or something, right? So that was pretty strange. But, there was never a steel structure building that ever collapsed because of a fire.
But Building 7 was not hit by anything. It's actually quite a distance from the other towers. It's not right next door. That was not even included in the 9/11 report. There's no mention of Building 7.
There are some very legitimate questions, a lot of them, that remain unanswered. All swept under the rug. I mean, they were, and you look at this, news reporters were talking about explosions. By the next day, nobody was.
So that's how you get people to see that, hey, what they're telling us isn't always true. Okay, but then you got the errors in the textbooks. There's some websites that you can go to see that. And in the summer, check out your school textbooks. You're paying for them. You might as well see if it's there. And then I've got those listed. And then there's rescuing devices for a blind chance perspective for billions of years. There's things that can't last millions of years. So they have to imagine things to make them last millions of years. Like the Oort cloud. They imagine to be true so we can still have comets. Like the finely tuned, the multiverse. They imagine that to be true to explain how we live in such a finely tuned universe. It can't be just, I mean, that couldn't happen by chance, but if there's infinite number of galaxies, we just happen to be in the right one. And there's the dynamo, which tries to explain why we still have a magnetic field, even though our half-life is 1,400 years for the magnetic field of Earth. And then they imagine dark matter so that we could still have spiral galaxies because they should wind up in 1 million years. And they imagine dark energy because our universe is accelerating is expanding at an accelerating rate. It's like anti-gravity, and they can't explain that. And then they also have to imagine something to preserve dinosaur soft tissue. They don't know what it is yet, but they just imagine that they're going to be able to imagine something that makes it work. And then they got wrong predictions. They thought that we had vestigial organs, and they took out tonsils and appendices, and there isn't purpose for them. And if you had them taken out, you're not as healthy as if they would have stayed in. And they were wrong about junk DNA. They were wrong about young galaxies. You know, the Hubble Deep Field and the James Webb Space Telescope. We're going to see young galaxies and population 3 stars. And it's such a joke right now. Jason Lyle, he says, you're wrong about your predictions. And once you realize you're wrong, I predict that you say galaxies formed much sooner than expected. And he was right both times. So it's not a matter of if the Big Bang falls apart, it's a matter of when. And then there's a bunch of frauds that have been in textbooks and museums like Piltdown Man and Nebraska Man and Orsi Man and Lucy. Oh, I didn't show you that when I was talking about it, but you can take one of these home. And then on the other side, or down at the bottom, or at the top, it's 6,000 years. When I was debating the scientist, he said, what points to 6,000 years? And I said, Uranus's magnetic field. Russell Humphreys accurately predicted using a 6,000-year model. Plus, he also accurately predicted the helium diffusion rate out of zircons, which won't mean anything to anybody, but it matched the 6,000-year line perfectly, not the billions of years. And then also the mutation rate. Ann Gibbons says mitochondria Eve, that's the first woman, would be a mere 6,000 years old. So astronomy, geology, and biology scientifically point to 6,000 years old. And there's a whole bunch of accurate predictions based mainly on the hydroplate. And then you're going to get this list of websites and YouTube channels. I encourage you to watch a video every day. You know, and if you could do devotions with kids or something, every day. I mean, we have more evidence against the Big Bang and evolution than ever before. We have more easy access to this information than ever before. And it's broken into bite-sized pieces that almost anybody can understand. So we have enough information. We just don't have enough soldiers doing this stuff with it. So we need to get equipped to stand up to the battle. And then there's websites there. I circled some of the hydroplate things, one in there. And also, long story short, that's phenomenal for saying how life, it's just so complex, the cell. And I'm asking people to be brave. That's what Del Bigtree. I got, let's see, yeah, this one. I saw him in Alexandria. Now, I'm not an autograph guy at all. But if you're going to lose your job, I want to thank you and get your autograph. And so Del, he's the guy behind the high wire. He won an Emmy with the doctors on CBS, so he's at the top of his profession. But then he heard about this CDC whistleblower that said, hey, we destroyed data that showed that the MMR causes autism. So he did a documentary on that called Vaxxed. So he lost his career at CBS, and he starts the high wire. And he gets thrown off of YouTube when he's talking about hydroxychloroquine. And the YouTube numbers say 2,000 to 5,000 viewers per show. When they all had to go to his show, it was over 200,000. And now it's over 6 million. And he says, we may not be first, but we're going to be right. You know, I'm not presenting it unless we can win in a court of law, because there's a lot of people who want to sue him. And so I encourage people to be brave. Maybe, you know, and people who can speak out like me, I got to speak out. If my income doesn't depend on it, I got to speak out for those who, you know, don't want to lose their income. So what can we do? We can join or start a community action team. Get more involved in your community. And hopefully you can start, you know, they called me the Johnny Appleseed of creation, you know, in Virginia, where I'd scatter these seeds. But what I want to do is plant creation trees. Consider having a creation club once a month and have that right before. We meet in our public library once a month, and we do it right the week before the Creationist speaks at the University of Northwestern. Who's heard of the Twin Cities Creation Science Association? Okay, a few people. But the third Tuesday of every month, come on down. And there's some really cool things. We're going to do a creation tour at the Como Zoo. We did a couple of them last year. We're going to do it again August 19th. And then that night, we're going to have something for kids. Brian Young is going to come in and blow things up or whatever. He's doing stuff for kids. I encourage you to have a booth at the fair. I love being at the fair because I get to talk to people outside of my bubble. And this is what I was doing. Should St. Cloud ISD 742 remove the errors in our textbooks? And I let people vote. And it's a way to show them that there's errors in our textbooks. And then I was at the National Eagle Center in Wabasha, and I went in there, and they got this Tong child skull. It's like, what does that have to do with eagles? And it says that it's an ancestor to humanity, and I happen to have, let's see, one of these books, maybe it's back there, a book by Dr. Carl Werner, The Frauds of Human Evolution. And I went out and I showed him that skull looks exactly like a chimpanzee skull. Why are you saying it's a human skull? And so we need to start pointing things out. When it says millions of years, like at Banning State Park or Jay Cook State Park, I go to the ranger station, I say, how do you know that's 2 million years old or 3 billion years old? And I did that at Banning. I had a conversation going in talking about the kayakers, and then I came out and I asked them, how do you know that's 2 million years old? And they all point to the boss. And the boss comes up and says, well, that's what the smart people tell us. And I said, well, yeah, that's because they got a blind chance perspective of the past. It's like thinking this building got put together by chance. It's absurd. And there's somebody one of the employees is in the back going, yeah. And so we just want them to think that perspective is absurd. And also you can get this curriculum. That book, it's The Grand Experiment. He's got a 2-year curriculum for about junior high, and he doesn't mention God at all. It could be in a public school. I encourage you to look at it, and it shows what's wrong with evolution and living fossils and human frauds. And so, yeah. And then you might not think you can do much, but you guys know how the Bismarck sank in World War II? This floating fortress, it was illegally the biggest battleship out there. These two, like Snoopy, these canvas planes came in and had little torpedoes. It's like mosquitoes against an elephant. But that little mosquito hit the rudder and it couldn't steer. So thank God they gave them everything they had and see what God could do with it. Okay, we're going to wrap this up. To suppress free speech is a double wrong. It violates the rights of the hearer as well as those of the speaker. And we saw that in spades during COVID, didn't we? We needed to hear what they had to say. Who is in Facebook jail? Anybody? Okay, well, it's just me. Okay, and then I went to the St. Cloud VA Memorial Day thing, celebration. I go walking in there. Somebody asks me, do you want some water? And I said, sure. And then they gave me the water, and I gave them one of these. This is a tract that I think everybody should get involved with. It's a freedom tract, points people to the First Amendment and to Jesus. And I gave it to him, and then a few minutes later, there's a security guy talking to me. You can't hand out literature on federal property. It's like, what? People have died to have their freedoms, and you can't use the freedoms on federal property? And he said, no. And he says, if you don't like the law, change the law. And that's frightening. Military thinks they're there to enforce the law? No, they're there to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. And he goes, do you have your driver's license? And I said, no. He said, what's your name? How's it spelled? What's your birthday? And it's like, did I commit a crime? But it was very heavy-handed. And then his friend comes over. So now there's another security guy. So there's two guys talking to me. And so then the first guy leaves, and the next guy's there. And it's like, yeah, we're here for a celebration. You can't hand stuff out. And I was like, okay. And I asked, did you take an oath to defend the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic? And he said, yeah. I used to thank military personnel, thank you for serving, but you can serve a tyrant. I don't want that. Thank you for defending the Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. And the guy said, yeah. And I said, well, can you tell me what's in the First Amendment? And he said, I'm not getting into a constitutional discussion. I said, I don't want a discussion, just let me know what's in it. And he didn't do it. And I said, because I've yet to meet anybody who's taken an oath to defend the Constitution who can tell me what's in the First Amendment. And so how do you defend what you can't define? And how do we know when our rights are being violated if we don't know what they are? And is there anybody here who'd like to take a stab at it? What's in the First Amendment? I guess there's only a handful of people. You know? No? Okay. Speech. There you go. Speech, religion, press, assembly. There we go. Bingo. You guys are bright. You guys are like the 99th percentile most of the time. So what we can do to help people in our community is take these tracts, and if you want me to change the name on the back to your church or to Restore Minnesota, I can do that. And you open it up, and it says what freedoms are protected, and then why did the Pilgrims come to America, and did people evolve or were we created? And the answers are there. And at the bottom it says, why do government schools teach false information to prop up blind chance perspectives of the past? And then it points people to Jesus. Are you free from the bondage of sin? And if you were to die today, where would you go? And could you imagine? These were designed to hand out at fireworks and parades. And could you imagine if you had this banner in the parade? And somebody's walking by in a big banner, "May God bless America as America honors God." 6-foot banner is $50 on Canva. Okay, and then you had people handing these out along up and down there. The people would know what their freedoms are. And the people who are the law enforcers would know when they're violating our freedom. And so what I'm going to be doing a survey on the 4th of July at the fireworks. Can you tell me what's in the First Amendment? Do you know what it is? And I'm just going to stroke tally. And it's like, well, what do you want to know? Here you go. And I'm going to have 2,000 of these. And so in St. Cloud, people are going to know what their freedoms are. So again, let's wrap this up. Land of the free. There's a lot of things chipping away at our freedoms. MMR, Real ID, UN tax, carbon tax, chemtrails, errors in the textbooks. There should be something that you can get behind and do something. And also, thank you guys for doing what you do. And I encourage you to get more involved in a community action team. If you don't have one, I ask that you consider doing it. All right. Thank you so much for your attention. Oh, here it is.
Brian, tell us about your table in the back.
Oh, on the table on the back, there's some DVDs. Yeah, there's this one, How to Win the Culture War. There's some videos on there. There are 2 motivational ones, and there's one of me at a state college in Florida. So that's on there. These are also on my YouTube channel. And also there's this Revival of Truth, where you can see some highlights of Catherine Edwards and Stanley Plotkin. And you can see that on Rumble also, along with the other ones. And let's see, you got the cheat sheet, so we know where to attack the blind chancers and get equipped to stand up for creation. We've got my YouTube channel, or my business card has the YouTube channel. And then you got the freedom tracks. And I hope, my prayer is that these things are handed out at every firework in the state and even the country. We need to know what our freedoms are. And this is a simple way to get people to know what they are, because the government schools does a very poor job of doing that. And then there's more books. I got some up here. This is the one that you should get into your library or even in your curriculum. This is thegrandexperiment.com. Let's see, VaxFacts. If you know anybody who's going to have a baby, give them this book. Dr. Paul Thomas, he lost his license because he wouldn't push the shots, and he said he lost $1 million a year because he wouldn't push the shots. And Dell says if you know anybody who's going to have a baby and you don't give them this book and their kid gets injured from a vaccine, you're part of it. So just let people know do what they want, but know what they do. Let's see, Cause Unknown is a really good one. And then he wrote this one because he didn't want his ex-wife and kids to get the shot. And Cause Unknown, it's very eye-opening. And then, that's about it. So that's the table in the back. I want to win the battle, and I'm going wherever God opens the door. I'm going down. I was going to go to St. Louis to meet with the creation scientists, and try and get them to go do the hydroplate. And Fred, he's the guy from Real Science Radio, he said, don't waste your time, go to the homeschoolers. So I went to the Mache conference up in Duluth a few weeks ago, and I spoke 5 or 6 times at churches and schools when I was up there. I'm going to Des Moines. I'll be speaking there probably 3 or 4 times. I'll speak at the conference too. And so I'm trying to start brush fires in the minds of men, freedom, and also realize that, we've been misled. And if something's like that big battleship, if it's reinforced by government education and all that stuff in museums, and it'll fall apart if enough people realize we've been misled. So now the race is on. The race is on. Can we tip them over or not? Yes?
Can you come back again?
Oh, I'd love to. I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to. You got probably 3 or 4 talks all in an hour and 15 minutes or whatever. But yeah, I try to go wherever God opens the doors. And even churches, if your church wants me to come in.